Hello, you're listening to DNA Today, a genetics podcast and radio show. I'm your host, Kira Dineen. I'm also a certified genetic counselor practicing in the prenatal space. On this show, as many of you know, we explore genetics' impact on our health through conversations with leaders in the field. These are experts like genetic counselors, researchers, doctors, and patient advocates. My guest today is Dr. Orion Buske, who is the CEO of PhenoTips. He spent the last 15 years working at the intersection of computer science, genomics, and healthcare. In this episode, we are continuing our telehealth focus, and really telehealth series it's turned into, by exploring digital tools in genomics. So thank you so much for joining us on the show with all of your experience. I'm excited to dive into the digital tools side of genomics with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kira. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, we've had a lot of overlap with DNA Today and PhenoTips, so it's nice to actually have like an episode just focused on PhenoTips. You guys have been a sponsor of the show for a while, and I've been the host of the speaker series as well. So we'll give a plug for that at the end for more genetic conversations, because there's not enough in the world, so we have to keep adding to it. So you have a PhD in computer science with a focus on algorithms for genetic medicine and research. What led you to this what sounds to me, a very specific career path and focus?
It's an interesting journey. It's been a fun trip for sure. I think when I was trying to figure out how I ended up at this place, I think it kind of actually comes back in high school, actually. I had a really amazing biology teacher who got a whole bunch of discarded and expired reagents and various things from connections. So we actually had a single capillary DNA sequencer in our high school.
And not many high schools can say that.
Yeah, no. And it wasn't that the high school funded this operation. It was just a teacher going out there sort of on a wing and setting these things up. And it was amazing. And I think from that point, I sort of got hooked into the potential here to understand our biology and use computers to try to analyze things. This was back, where you would blast everything and you're trying to figure out where the promoters are from sequence analysis and all that sort of stuff. And it ended up being the thing that I wanted to go to university to study. So I went across the state. I'm originally from the U.S., Washington State. So went to Seattle for undergraduate studies, trying to focus on computational biology in some way, shape, or form. And that led me eventually here to Toronto for graduate studies because of the really, really strong relationship between the computer science corridor between Waterloo and Toronto and all of the health research going on with the University Health Network, Sick Kids Hospital, all of these hospitals with different research centers. So the opportunity to apply technology and software to help doctors and care providers much more directly as part of their patient care, and in particular in the space of genetics, was really the promise that brought me here, and ended up being the focus of the master's and PhD work that I did, and resulted in the software and the company that we now are running and with and taking to the world these days. So it's been a good trip.
Yeah. So tell me more about starting PhenoTips and the inspiration behind it and what you saw a need for, and saying, well, if I develop a company, I could attack that need and really identify it and be able to address it within the field and healthcare in general.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the starting point of that. I think it actually started from a collaboration between computer scientists in the research group that I was in at the University of Toronto and geneticists at the clinic at Sick Kids just down the street. So we were collaborating with them, looking at the data that they were getting as part of the patient visits and the information that was being recorded in the electronic health record systems, and seeing this isn't sufficient in order to power genetic medicine. This isn't sufficient to allow computers to use the power of data analysis and associations and bring in new findings rapidly in order to help inform diagnoses for rare genetic conditions across those thousands of different ones that these genetics clinics have to keep in mind. So it started as actually just this research project that was funded quite substantially here in Canada, and that started the development of this open source research tool, PhenoTips, that was this database that was used at the hospital there. But really quickly we partnered with and got support from a lot of the leaders in rare disease genetics research, both here in Canada, so at Sick Kids at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario with Kim Boycott, and in the US with the NIH's Undiagnosed Disease Program. So all of these sort of leaders in that space saw the value of having a tool to collect this rich structured phenotype-genotype data that could then inform sort of gene discovery and further research into genetics and push that boundary further going forward. So that sort of started the development of the project, but pretty quickly there was interest in rolling it out into clinics around the world. And so we formed the company originally to provide services for that open source research project, like helping people set it up, being liable if things go wrong. But then in 2018, we sort of finished the tech transfer and the ownership transfer of the project out into the company. And that's when I had completed my graduate studies. And so then we now have the opportunity to take this project that has use all around the world and build and scale that up, which is, great timing with the increasing rollout of genetic medicine.
Yeah, I don't think you could have timed this better. Like in terms of just, launching, right before the pandemic happened with so many healthcare providers now, I wouldn't say scrambling as much. I think more a year ago we were scrambling of like, how are we all going to work from home? How does this telehealth thing work for people that, most of the time when healthcare systems are doing a major change, it takes months, if not years, to get it to that point. And then suddenly many people were like, oh, we need to figure this out this week. And I think you bring up a great point with a lot of electronic health record systems. They're not set up for genomics. I think we've all experienced this if you work in genomics, if you work in healthcare, that it's not set up to really be having a good workflow with that. And so PhenoTips really, you describe it as a genomic health record. Can you explain this a little bit more? Like, I've been using this term genomic health record, but some people may not have heard of this. Is this something that PhenoTips kind of coined?
No, this isn't something that we coined on our own. This is actually from various papers and publications in the literature. It's a term that's sort of been tossed around a little bit, and I think we latched onto that as being a really expressive way of describing what our vision is, in the sense of it being this independent need for a platform to manage genetic information and genetically related information alongside an electronic health record system, where the EHRs are really focused on archiving data and storing it for a long term in the context of an individual patient. But for genetics, we know that opens up to the world of caring for families, caring for relationships between individuals, and genetic information has the ability to inform that. So we're really focused on using that information to empower patients and care providers to take advantage of genetic information in all of the different aspects of care that it can inform, and ultimately achieve the goal of helping the healthcare system become more proactive, right? This is information where you can get it about an individual right from the time that they're born or even before, and can start informing the care of that individual from day one or negative one. It's a really incredible technology that gives us a huge amount of potential to improve our healthcare systems if we have the infrastructure and technical infrastructure to take advantage of it.
And so you're talking about how just important it is to be able to collect this information and organize it. Why is it important for, if we're thinking about for physicians, clinicians, and also the patient side to be able to have access to this and have it be set up in this way? With your insight, why should people be adopting more of these digital tools in their practice?
So
it's a loaded question, right? Like we could do a whole episode just on that.
Absolutely. I think everyone in healthcare is, if they haven't already adopted digital tools for most things, you have people who are, the pressure isn't there yet, but it will be, and pretty much everyone else is facing the pressure, because unless you are digitizing these things, that is the very first step in order to be able to take advantage of all of the other information that is out there in order to basically leverage computers, leverage algorithms in order to help doctors do the things that they do best in terms of caring for patients. I mean, when you think, about healthcare, the amount of information that we have that doctors have to be able to access and search through and synthesize in order to effectively care for patients, it's absolutely immense. And even in the space of rare genetic conditions, it's like a new disease gene is characterized every other day. And so in order to stay on top of that information, we need electronic systems, we need algorithms to be able to compile and make accessible that information based on patients' data, and everything has to be digitized in order for that to be the case. And that's just even one aspect around the Diagnostic Odyssey. It's like, if you don't have that, people just are going to be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. The standard issue in rare conditions is these incredibly long diagnostic odysseys. And by having all of this information be digitized and connected up with other systems, we can bring that odyssey down and make these much more practical to diagnose with exome and genome sequencing rolling out. I mean, I think there are a lot of other benefits too in terms of digital technologies, like access of the information, patient ownership of that information. I mean, with HL7 Fire and the accessibility of that information, even on your iPhone, it's incredible what is becoming possible. And then beyond that, just in terms of research and data and collaboration. So if you have everything locked away in paper records that are being faxed between different institutions, there's a barrier for any downstream analysis or other component, whether it's a service or a tool or an algorithm that's trying to analyze information in order to improve care. You have to pay that cost with every single party that you have, or you have, someone paying the cost and then separate data brokering and all of these issues. If you have that information being digitized at the point of care, you're lowering the barrier to take advantage of all of these different healthcare benefits down the road.
And the information just gets to people much quicker because you can just say, log into the portal, and not waiting for a fax. You're standing by the fax. You're waiting for it to come through. There's certainly a lot of, physical obstacles too when it comes to that. One of the most aspects I'm familiar with PhenoTips is the Pedigree Builder, because I'm a genetic counselor. So obviously pedigrees are like, my nuts and bolts in terms of what I do every day. So for people that may not be familiar with the PhenoTips Pedigree Builder, what information does it collect? How is it superior to, say, pen and paper? That's more of the traditional way of collecting family history.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about some of the things that our Pedigree tool highlights. So in particular, we focus on making sure that there is structured ways of recording the clinical signs, symptoms of the different individuals, any high-level genetic findings, cancer diagnoses, and the information about them, which in a structured, again, digitized, computable way, so that you basically have a one-click mechanism for doing risk assessments with all of your favorite rather cumbersome tools that you might have to otherwise enter into separately, as well as I know from all of our conversations with genetic counselors, as you're drawing this pedigree over the consult with an individual, sometimes there can be additional findings and you run out of room, you have to reshift, maybe you have to redraw. Having this digitized and having a little button to have a nice layout can be really appealing in order to make sure that everything comes out quite pretty and well structured. I think one of my favorite bits of feedback is when genetic counselors tell us that the patients that they're seeing want a copy of the pedigree that is drawn through PhenoTips, and they have the ability to share that, and it is nice and well drawn and all of that. So.
Yeah, because sometimes reading handwriting can be, quite challenging, and, making sure all the information's on there. Everybody can fit on the same piece of paper if you have large families. And so I think that's just like, a few of the really great aspects of having one, and that it's easy to go back to and you can update it. You don't have to start a whole new pedigree every time, which can save so much time, especially if patients are coming in, over the years and having follow-up appointments. There's also other exciting feature that I like, the auto pedigree builder. So how does this work? Can patients submit information prior to their appointment, like through a portal to get that information ahead of the appointment? Or is this more during the appointment? What does this look like?
Yeah, so this is a new component of the software that we've been working on a lot recently and are really excited to have just announced, which is this a patient intake form that automatically draws a pedigree. So the clinician or scheduler can send a secure link to a patient pre-visit, potentially through a communication tool like MyChart or something like that. That allows the patient and their family to fill out this intake family health history form, basically, that's appropriate for the particular department that they're being seen by, that essentially collects detailed information for a 3-generational pedigree. As a result, when they can save it, consult with a family member potentially, get that additional information that might be hard to get if they're filling this out at the clinic, or doing it for the first time as part of the consultation with the GC. They have this opportunity to take their time, do it in different phases, and then when they submit, the PhenoTips receives that information and will automatically draw that pedigree, structure the symptom reporting that the patient is doing, and provide that then for the GC to review and ask follow-up questions and revise during that consult.
And not only does that save so much time during a session of just having that ahead of time, that patients can have more accurate information, because then they have access to, oh, let me call grandma about this, or let me call my dad, or let me call my aunt, because they'll have more information than this. Or, usually people that are older in the family are the ones that have more of the family stories and the history and medical information that goes with that. So I imagine just the accuracy is so much better with family history. And then you're taking more time during genetic counseling and other appointments where you can focus on educating the patient and answering their questions as opposed to collecting a lot of that information. So you end up, being more efficient, but then having more time for, what we're there for as healthcare providers for. So that's, so many great things that are all wrapped up in just being able to use digital tools so that we can do more of what we want to be doing with our jobs and like addressing those topics.
Yeah, and I think you were talking with Charles Shaw Smith at Exeter in one of those speaker series webinars recently about some of those, the errors that can potentially crop up when everyone is doing things on paper, and how much that digitization can really help streamline that data flow and help improve the data that's being collected from patients as part of care.
Yeah, it definitely does just help. And then, as you said, so many more people have access to the information. Something else that we've kind of brought up a couple times but haven't really dived into yet is how PhenoTips can speed up the Diagnostic Odyssey. So for a lot of rare disease patients, being undiagnosed, you mentioned different institutions in Canada and the US that are, focused on this and focused on the rare disease community. What is the specific PhenoTips tool or, aspect of the tools that help do this to give more of okay, here's some of maybe the differential diagnoses. These are diagnoses that maybe it could be to help narrow down and really speed up to give that accurate diagnosis.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about some of that. So in particular, where we've been driving that functionality in order to help with the Diagnostic Odyssey, in particular for individuals with rare diseases or potentially having rare diseases, is around using the structured information, usually from a physical exam from a geneticist, so that phenotype that the geneticist would be recording, those observations of maybe an abnormal facial shape or something about the fingers, or those sorts of individual characteristics, and making sure that we can build tools to help the structuring of that information, so that when the geneticist or the other care provider is doing this phenotyping within PhenoTips, the information that comes out is curated and coded in such a way that we can use algorithms to suggest other conditions that they might want to look for in that patient, maybe other phenotypic features that might be related to a few different conditions that the patient might have, as well as any potential genetic factors that could contribute to the patient's particular presentation. So ultimately, that then helps inform which genetic test should be ordered for the patient based on their personalized characteristics. So really trying to drive forward that personalized approach to medicine of saying, here is a particular patient, here is their presentation clinically. Based on that, we might, rather than ordering this particular panel, we might order this panel and add these 3 genes in order to make sure that we are going to get a positive result if there is one in those, right? The worst thing would be if you only ordered that particular panel and you got a negative result, and now you have to go back and order a much larger test again because you missed it the first time around.
And I know our healthcare systems are very different compared to Canada and the US, but certainly cost can be a factor. I mean, in different ways in terms of like ordering these tests. It can be very expensive. And in the US, sometimes insurance will cover a certain percentage, maybe all of it, maybe, none of it in certain cases. I know it's a little bit different, with your healthcare system, but that's certainly a consideration of like, during the Diagnostic Odyssey of like how many tests are you doing, and the sooner you can get an accurate diagnosis of having better treatments, hopefully, and starting, organizations and research to be able to increase the amount that we know about those conditions and being able to treat them. So I'm sure, this is just kind of the start of, all of that, and so that everything can fall into place.
Yeah, I think it's the question is, or the question that the community is having is, at what point do you order an exome or a genome? How early on in the process do you order these things? And at what point, within the next few years, when do we get to a point where people are being sequenced routinely or population scale, and then that information can be on file as part of their genomic health record and inform the care through the rest of their life?
And eventually when that happens, whenever that is, we're really going to need PhenoTips, because we're going to need a way to organize all this and be able to have patients be followed by their data and not, oh, well, it was at this healthcare system and now I've moved to this other place and now I don't have access to it. Whereas, that's just one of the things that it seems like PhenoTips is able to cover. If we're fast forwarding, kind of looking in the next 10 to 15 years, how do you see genetic medicine changing in terms of digital tools and just being able to really utilize this in healthcare?
Yeah, I think that's a very big question. There are a lot of ways to answer that, and I know that, it's been interesting to see and hear about, for instance, the NHGRI's big sort of large visions for the next 10 years in terms of genetics and its rollout. And I think a lot of those ring true to my belief about the way that this is all going to roll out. Genetic testing is becoming more and more affordable. It's going to become part of routine care. And I think within the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see the majority of people having their genomes sequenced, and that genomic information being on file, either managed personally on their phones or managed as part of the healthcare systems in a federated way, where wherever they're going, that information is accessible for clinical decision support, risk assessment, and those sorts of things. I think it's really about there's going to be this dramatic increase in access to genetic testing, and so that will drive the growth of all of these tools to help use that information to improve the care of patients over their life. I think this is going to be, this vision in terms of, even in terms of the intake and triage to care that we see in an acute setting is going to be expanded much more when it goes out into primary care and general practice.
Yeah, I think that's all very good points, and that, genetics is becoming not just, as you said, in certain areas, but it's really becoming wide scale in healthcare. And, I think most people at this point have had some kind of genetic test at some point in their lives. And we're, as you said, we're going to see much more of that. And digital tools are really the only way we're going to be able to move forward and take all of this big data and figure out, okay, how is this affecting someone's health and how can we help them with this information? Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing all your insight with this. PhenoTips is definitely a company to keep track of and see everything that's changing. If people are interested, you could head over to PhenoTips.com. As we mentioned a couple times, I'm the host of their speaker series. So we do about once a month, we do a monthly webinar, and we invite, genetic professionals, or if you're listening to this, then you're invited as well, to join us. And that is live. So you can join us and be able to ask questions and just connect with us and other professionals on there. So we've had about 7 installments so far. So you can also check out all of, they're all archived on there. So it's PhenoTips.com. Click the stories tab, and then you click on the speaker series. If you're interested in learning more about the show, you can head over to DNApodcast.com, search for us, DNA Today, on social media, as well as PhenoTips. We're going to be connecting with them more so on social media, so we can all connect on there. And if you have questions for me or Orion, definitely email in at info@dnapodcast.com. Thank you again for coming on and just sharing all of this. It's really exciting just to see everything that PhenoTips is doing and is, coming out with. I mean, brand new auto Pedigree Builder. There's just so much to be keeping track of with PhenoTips. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Kira. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for listening, guys, and join us next time to learn, discover new advances in the world of genetics.